Today's pre-algebra lesson is lesson 10-2, how to solve ax is equal to b. But let's take a quick look at Friday's lesson when you're solving equations with addition and subtraction. Anytime you're solving an equation for x, always ask yourself, what is happening to x? And in this case, 7 is being added to x, and the opposite of adding 7 is subtracting 7. So you need to show me on your paper that you're going to subtract 7 from the left side and the right side. And that gives you the final answer of 3, which we all knew was true anyway. Even if you can do these problems in your head, like this one, we all knew the answer was going to be 3. I need you to show me your steps. Show your work. Show me what you do to the left side and to the right side of the equation. Because as we continue into this chapter and further chapters, the equations get more complex, and it'll be important to show your work each step of the way. They won't always be ones you can look at and just guess or even just know what the answer is off the top of your head. With this equation, ask yourself what's happening to x. Well, we're subtracting 14 from x. So the opposite would be to add 14 to both sides of the equation. However, I tend to always want to change my equations into addition problems. There's just some consistency, and partly because, as you learned last week, addition is always commutative. It doesn't matter the order you're adding them. So for me, I would always change my subtraction to adding the opposite. Some people like to think of the phrase keep, change, where you keep the x the same, you change subtraction to addition, and you change the positive 14 to negative 14. However you do it, in the long run, I believe that changing subtraction to adding the opposite will be the most consistent way to solve every one of your algebra problems. So now we see what's happening to x is that we're adding negative 14. Well, the opposite of negative 14 is positive 14. So let's add 14 to the left side and to the right side of the equation. That gives us our final answer. X is negative 59. And that was the kind of problems we did last week. Today's problems will look like, we could do one more example. Let's skip this. I think you've seen enough of these. Today's problems will look like a variable being multiplied times an integer, or possibly a fraction that's equal to another number. In this case, we all know what the answer is. We know x is going to be 5 because 3 times 5 is 15. But most of these problems you won't just look at and know the answer. So the idea is the same. The steps are the same as to what we did at the end of last week. Ask yourself, what is happening to x? The opposite of multiplying by 3 is dividing by 3. So let's divide both sides of this equation by 3 to give us our final answer of 5. If, however, your coefficient is a fraction, you could divide both sides by that fraction, because that in essence is the opposite of what's happening right now. Because what's happening right now is that x is being multiplied by 2/3. And with your calculator and the fraction button, this is an easy problem for you to solve. You'd look at this and say anything divided by itself just leaves me 1, so the left side is 1x. And the right side, you'd pick up your good old calculator and say 8 divided by 2/3, and you get your final answer. But for me, I don't always have a calculator with me. So an alternate way of solving this type of a problem, meaning this type of a problem when you have a coefficient that's a fraction, I would choose to multiply both sides by the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 2/3 is 3/2. Some people even jokingly kind of refer to it, instead of as a reciprocal, they'll refer to it as a refliprical, and that helps them remember that they're to flip 2/3 upside down. Any number times its reciprocal is 1, and on the right side of the equation, you'll see that 2 goes into 8 and leaves you with a 4, and then 4 times 3 gives you the 12. Just like the same answer of the previous problem. So you do have options when you have a fraction for a coefficient. You could divide both sides by that coefficient. This works very well if you have a calculator. If you don't have a calculator, multiply both sides by the reciprocal of that coefficient. Now, coefficient maybe is not necessarily a word we've used a lot this year. A coefficient is simply a number that you're multiplying a variable by. In this case, we're multiplying the variable 2, or variable x, by the fraction 2/3. 2/3 is the coefficient. Let's try another one with the fraction. That problem appears to have disappeared. You may now start the worksheet. Be careful when you have coefficients that are fractions.